Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. This is part 2 of my August wrap-up, and it will also be my wrap-up for the N.E.W.T.s magical readathon. So I was aiming to become an auror as my magical profession, and that would require 9 N.E.W.T.s. I ended up getting 10 N.E.W.T.s, and then I have 3 additional books, which I probably could find some way to fit them into a N.E.W.T. category as well. I just basically couldn't be bothered, and so those will be 3 additional books. So in part 1 of the wrap-up, I've already talked about the first 4 of these books. So for Defense Against the Dark Arts, I needed an O. So my A book was The Nickel Boys, right there, for Acceptable and Defense Against the Dark Arts. Exceeds Expectations was Lanny, and my O was Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan. And then for Herbology was to read an audiobook, and that was Daisy Jones and the Six. And so all of those I have covered in more detail in part 1 of the August wrap-up. So now moving on. So for Charms, it was to read a book with a beautiful cover. And I read The Fruit of the Drunken Tree by Ingrid, Rojas, Contreras. This takes place mostly in Colombia during the reign of Pablo Escobar, and it's about Chula is our main character, so we're hearing from her perspective, and she has kind of a middle-class life, a sister, and her parents, her dad works in, I think, in the oil industry, and so they are, you know, they are doing well. They live in a gated community, in part because, yes, they're doing so well, but also the gates are kind of required because things, it's not necessarily safe. So there's all these paramilitary and guerrilla groups out there, warring factions and everything. And so it's a quite unstable time and place to be. We also have Petrona, who is like she's only 13 at the beginning of the story, but she's the maid. And she lives basically in what I can only describe as like a shanty town that's built like in the hills, and literally having to like on your hands and knees crawl over like rocks and debris and everything to get like to where her house is on this hill. And Chula's mother is actually from the same place. And so we essentially follow both of these characters, and given the circumstances that they're each in, and will those circumstances get better or worse? How will they converge? All of this given their personal lot in life, and then the greater geopolitical climate. This book is written really beautifully, and even though I didn't necessarily see myself in Chula or in the other characters just based on their life circumstances so much different than mine, there's a particular scene. It's a reunification scene. And I was actually running, I know exactly where I was on the trail when I read this, or I was listening to this on audiobook. When I listened to this, and it reminded me so much of when my husband was either deployed or like when he was in boot camp or some sort of training, particularly not seeing him for 3 months after boot camp, and then the first time he came home from Iraq after a 7-month deployment. Just all of the feelings and worries and excitement and jitters and all the things that you feel after not having seen someone in person and having very little contact over extended period of time. I felt like she wrote that reunification scene so close to how I felt, and I really, really related to the characters in that scene in particular, even though the circumstances are very different. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was just wonderful, and I believe this is, I'm not sure where this ended up with the BookTube prize, but I know that it at least made it quite far in the BookTube prize. So that was my A for Charms, and I needed an E in Charms, so for that I read, and this is to read a comic book or graphic novel or a book under 150 pages, and I read the graphic novel Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. So this is basically, what's her name? I can't remember her name. Oh, Nimona, no kidding. Nimona is this girl here, and she basically, she's quite, I don't know, incorrigible or something. She basically wants to join the villain and be his sidekick, and Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin is the hero, and Sir Lord Blackheart is the bad guy, and Nimona wants to be the sidekick of the bad guy, the villain. And it's just kind of, you find out the way their world works and how kind of clear cut their roles are, and how she just really inserts herself right into Lord Blackheart's life. Nimona is a shapeshifter, and so she turns out to be far more useful to Lord Blackheart than he thinks that she will to begin with. She's quite capable, but you know, with great power comes great responsibility. Then we move on to potions. As an auror, I need to know a fair bit about potions, and for my A in potions, it was to read your best friend's book. Read your friend's favorite book. So the friend I chose is my husband, and his favorite book is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. This is the Ralph Steadman edition. I think I have his old Falling Apart edition. Hang on, let me look. Right here. Have a box of old mass market paperbacks in here. So this is Sam's copy. It's being held together by electrical tape, and it is quite battered. He would put this in the pocket of his, the leg pocket of his camis, and it has like the grittiness from, this has been to Iraq and back, and to the field multiple times, I'm sure. It's got his name and his terrible handwriting in there. This edition, however, doesn't have the drawings in it. And this one does have the Ralph Steadman drawings in it. So if I can find one that's appropriate. Oh, not that one. Okay, here we go. Well, this is the one that's on the cover, but this is the black and white. So you'll get pictures like this every now and then throughout the book. And essentially, so Hunter Thompson was a gonzo journalist, and as far as I understand it, gonzo journalism is essentially a form of journalism where the journalist really inserts him or herself into the lifestyle of whoever it is that he's doing a story on, or whatever it is he's doing the story on. So, you know, he's on, like, he does, was it Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail? He does, I think he's with Nixon on his, I could be wrong on that, but on the presidential campaign trail. Hell's Angels, he embeds himself within the Hell's Angels and writes kind of as an insider. And this is basically just a trip to Las Vegas with his lawyer, and it is just drug-addled mania, and it's absurd and thrilling and just really off the wall. I'd seen the book several times. The movie starring Hunter S. Thompson, and is it Benicio del Toro, I think, plays the lawyer. It was probably one of the first books, or one of the first movies that Sam showed to me when we started dating 20 years ago. Yeah. And so, anyhow, I'd seen the movie so many times. I think I actually thought I had read the book, but I hadn't. And there's a whole section, a significant amount of the book actually isn't even in the movie. And so I would like to reread the movie, because I have in my head, the last scene in my head in the movie is definitely not the last scene from the book. And I can't remember where the movie goes after a certain point. But trigger warnings for, like, everything. Yeah, for everything. So this is supposed to be kind of a commentary and a look at just the drug-addled sex, drugs, and rock and roll 60s lifestyle, essentially. He wrote this in 71, and he was well known for being quite the user himself. I'm going to 3.5 stars for this. The overall enjoyment for me isn't, like, super high up there, but I feel like it's an important book, and I enjoyed it for what it is. It's just not particularly what I'm looking for in a book anymore. For my E, exceeds expectations in potions, it was to read a book with your house color. I just realized that I am wearing a Gryffindor shirt right now. I went with Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. I guess it's urban fantasy. If this is urban fantasy, it's the first urban fantasy I've ever read, and it certainly wasn't what I was expecting as far as urban fantasy, because there's not really like a city, because we're mostly like in the desert and like little sparse towns, but I've heard it described as urban fantasy. So I just might not have a great understanding of what urban fantasy is, but that's okay. This follows Maggie, a Dinata, which is the formerly known as the Navajo Indians, and there was like a great flood that came over the United States and probably much more of the world, I can't remember, and basically they like relocated, so there's like New Denver and different things, so you'll recognize parts of the United States, but the geography has changed quite a lot, and this follows kind of the native myths, the native like spirit myths. So Maggie is a monster hunter, and she gets involved quite early in the book in having to go take down some monsters. A little girl has been taken, and then she ends up, for the rest of the book basically, she is teamed up kind of reluctantly with Kai, who is a medicine man, and he's the grandson of this older medicine man that had really taken Maggie in under his wing and had really been like the fatherly support for her. Maggie is basically set with this task by the coyote, and that she is hopefully going to discover the source of all these killings that have been going on, and we follow the adventure of this and the adventures and misadventures of this and her dealings with the coyote and with other kind of factions within their world. So this was really exciting, and I think there's another book coming out soon. I think this is going to be a series. This is the Sixth World series, so this is book 1 in that, and it is very Gryffindor-y, I think. So that was a fun 4-star read for me. Then I needed an A in Transfiguration. Required reading a book with LGBTQIA+ representation, and I read 100 Nights of Hero by Isabel Greenberg. This is the book. I got this for basically all of mine and my husband's siblings for Christmas last year, including myself. And I just now got around to reading it. I was kind of waiting for a special time to read it. If you watch BookTube a lot, you've probably seen this book around. It's inspired by 1001 Arabian Nights. So basically, we start off with these two men who are talking, and the one man suggests to the other that he bets that he could get his wife to be unfaithful, that he could seduce the other guy's wife. And he's like, oh no, my wife is completely faithful. I don't think if I gave you 100 nights, you would be able to do that. And so they kind of take this bet on. Meanwhile, the wife's maidservant is eavesdropping on this conversation. Well, the maidservant and the wife are actually in love. And so she goes back and warns the wife, and they come up with this scheme to protect her, because if she ends up being unfaithful, they're going to kill the wife. And so they have these 100 nights together away from the husband. The husband leaves for 100 nights to let the other guy come and seduce her. So the women come up with a plan, and the maidservant ends up telling stories, these thrilling stories for 100 nights, distracting the man from seducing her. You have the background story that sets it all up, and then you have the actual stories, and we're hearing from the maidservant and seeing it's a graphic novel, if that wasn't clear. It's a graphic novel, and so we're hearing all of these little like fairy tales basically being told by the maidservant throughout the book, and it was fantastic. 5 stars for this. So that concludes the 9 books that I were required to become an R. And then I also read, got an A in Care of Magical Creatures, reading A Place for Us by Fatima Farheem Mirza. I listened to this on audiobook, but I was able to pick up a physical copy from my library as well. And I never liked this cover until I was like in the middle of it, and I went to reference something in the physical book, and I actually looked at the cover and realized what it is. It's the moon, and then there's a house in there, and it made so much more sense to me, and there's meaning within the book for it. So this is a 5-star read for me. I fell in love with this family, and this was one of those books where, as I was getting toward the end of it, because I was listening to it on audiobook, I would see 2 hours and 20 minutes left, and I was sad that I was going to have to be leaving this family. So we start off at the wedding of the older daughter, and they're wondering, is the brother gonna show up to this? And most of the story is told in the past when they are children, and they are a Muslim Indian family living in the United States. I believe they're in kind of like the suburbs of the San Francisco Bay Area, just based on some of the references that they made. Los Angeles was 7 hours away, and I think Palo Alto was an hour away or something like that. Or Palo Alto or San Francisco were an hour away, something like that. So this, takes place roughly 100 miles from me. So as far as the physical place that they were, I had a good idea of the landscape and the climate that they were in. So basically, we follow the life and the struggles of this Indian American family who is Muslim, living in the United States. So we follow this family as they basically just experience life and the ups and downs and possibilities that can occur. A big point here for this family that they have to deal with is that they are living in the United States when 9/11 happens, and the dad has a big beard and the mom wears a hijab, and at a certain point, the daughters have to decide whether they're going to wear a headscarf as well. And so these are kind of complicating factors in their life, just like we would all have different factors in our life. What I get mostly from this book, and I think I see in books, in like family sagas that I really tend to like, I see the same thing where we have a certain idea of someone's motivations behind something or the way that something panned out because we're hearing it from one person's perspective. Then later we hear it from the other person's perspective, and we actually find out what we thought was something that was maybe negative was actually positive and was done out of love, and we just get so much more of a rounded idea of this family's whole experience and the reasons behind certain actions and decisions that are made within a family. And I think this did this so beautifully, and I just had such a heart for most of these characters, all of these characters. I ended up with a particular affection for one character, but I don't want to go into who it is because I think it might be a little bit of a spoiler if I did that. But anyhow, I really, really enjoyed A Place for Us. 5 stars. So then we have a few books. I could probably fit them into the N.E.W.T.s, but basically, who's got time for that? I'm trying to read books in September now. So this book was a little bit special. The Patient Zero by Jonathan Maberry. This was given to us by a nurse during my husband's most recent hospitalization. And he went, it's his favorite book, and he went and bought this, found out that Sam likes zombies, and he went out and bought this, a brand new copy for us, and brought it into us on his day off. And then he came back on shift a few days later and was so excited to see us actually reading the book, and was just, you could tell when someone really loves a book and then they get so excited that they can talk to someone about it. So Adam, thank you for this book. So this essentially this is the first in the Joe Ledger series. So I basically describe this as like Jack Reacher, but with zombies. So, and I don't know if the other books continue to follow zombies. So Joe Ledger is former Army. He's been a police officer in Baltimore for the previous 8 years when we start this book. And he is soon headed to start training at the FBI. But then he gets tapped to join the DMS, the Department of Military Sciences, which is basically like code word for we're fighting zombies. So we have the perspective that's taking place in Maryland in the United States around the DMS and any infiltration or, zombie activity that has taken place there. And then the other perspective is with some characters in the Middle East, in Iraq. Most of it's actually happening in Afghanistan in this like super technologically advanced hidden like bunker built into a mountain. And this like super genius woman who is behind the zombie plague pathogen. And so we find out about things that are happening on that end, on the creating the substance, and then we're finding out about how they're coming to terms with what this actually is and what it means, and this could be essentially a global extinction event and all of this. And so we're following both sides of the coin, and it was a really like exciting exciting romp of a ride. So probably not like what I'm necessarily reaching for, but it was really fun to read, really good kind of escapism, and my husband absolutely loved it. So it was really fun for me to get to read this to him, being that I know that he loves zombies so much. So I gave this 3.5 stars. Next up, I enjoyed The Lost Man by Jane Harper on audiobook, although I was able to get a physical copy from the library as well. This is a standalone by Jane Harper. She has done The Dry and... what's the other one? The Dry and Force of Nature in the Aaron Falk Detective series, but this is a standalone. Did I already talk about this one? I just realized I'm pretty sure I talked about this one in part 1. So just kidding. But I love Jane Harper's writing and I can't wait for more. So finally, The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the sequel to The Poppy War. The magic in this, so I'm not going to go deeply into what this is because it's a sequel. But the magic in this, as far as like calling down gods in order to manifest your magic, reminded me a lot of Trail of Lightning, in that we have like a cultural, we have a very specific culture in their belief system, and then that's how the magic comes through. We follow on from the Poppy War with Rin and her crew. They're trying to make a republic, basically. So the Dragon Lord, which is the father, Neza's father, Neza from that she went to school with at synagogue. Rin and her crew basically join the Dragon Lord in the Dragon Republic, and the hope is to basically going from, they want to take down the Empress. They basically want to change the form of government that they have, from having an Empress and having basically, you know, if you're close to the Empress and geologically close to the Empress in the north, then you're probably pretty well off and well-to-do and fine, but especially those who are further away in the south, which is like where Rin is from, are struggling and often starving. And the Dragon Lord, with Rin's backing, and she joins forces with him, they want to create a republic, a democracy, and that is basically the premise of this book as we go forward. I don't want to give too much away about what had happened before that, obviously, or then what ensues, but that's kind of the setup of that, and that's how we get the title, The Dragon Republic. Great fun, 4 stars. I was really loving it, and I thought the pace in this one was much more kind of steady than in Poppy War. There was one section, maybe kind of the beginning of the end section, that kind of dragged for a bit, because they're rather than the characters like moving along in the book, we're kind of like sedentary for a little while. And it felt very much like that in the book. But all in all, really loved The Dragon Republic, 4 stars. So these are the books that I read for the Newt Magical Readathon, plus a couple extras. I would love to know if you participated in the Newts, how many Newts did you earn, and have you read any of these books? Are you interested in reading any of these books now? Thank you, dog, for bumping the tripod. Thank you for watching. See you around the tube.